We do have one change that's not here, so I wanted to start there and say, Manish could not make it, but Tracy is here.
I'm not Manish.
Okay, so my name is Joah Spearman. I'm the co-founder of AvecMode. I also blog for Huffington Post about things related to style, fashion, etc. I also use my phone way too much, and so this is probably the longest I'll go without my phone this week. So bear with me. So quick sample from the audience. Raise your hand if you have downloaded an app in the last month. I think I got it near 100%. Okay, now raise your hand if at some point in the last year you have thought to yourself, man, I wish there was an app for that. Okay, so pretty much what's happening is everyone's using their phones, yet everyone still finds that there are other needs that their mobile phone is yet to fulfill. And these people on the stage with me are finding a lot of those needs and addressing them with their businesses. So I'm super excited to have them on the stage with me. So I will start to my left and let each of the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Anthony Krumeich. I'm the CEO of Bloodhound. And should I say much about?
Yeah.
Okay. We help people do business in person at events, so things like trade shows and conferences. We've got a self-serve platform. Organizer signs up, can create apps that the attendees and exhibitors use. So you should all download it for this event. This event is on there, I think. You can find each other, network, see the schedule, do all that kind of stuff. So Bloodhound.
So my name is Tracy Sun. I'm pinch hitting for Manish here. I'm co-founder and head of marketing for Poshmark. Poshmark is a marketplace for fashion that's built entirely on the iPhone. So we are a company that has done mobile first. I've heard a lot of people say that today. What we do is we help women across the country upload items from their closet in about 60 seconds, create a listing, and make it available to sale for anyone in the country to buy.
Hi, I'm Joe McCann. I'm the mobile architect at a company called Bazaarvoice, not to be confused with Bazaarboys, which is a completely different website. Bazaarvoice, we're a SaaS B2B company providing a platform for consumer engagement and conversation. I run the mobile department there, so all things tactical, from things like building iOS and Android SDKs to strategic as well.
And I'm Andrew Hoag, and I'm the CEO of UrbanTag, which is a social discovery platform for places. And I have a bit of news to announce today. Actually, we're announcing our acquisition by Tag, the social discovery network. And so we're really excited to take some of the lessons that we learned at UrbanTag around social discovery and mobile-first development and apply that to Tagged as a social platform.
All right, so great group of panelists here, and my first question is going to be a little bit of a history lesson. And I know that I started getting really involved in the internet in the early days, not as an entrepreneur, but just as a consumer and user. And there were some things that happened really well in the late 90s, mid 90s, in terms of website development, whether it's travel sites, consumer sites, e-commerce, etc. And what I want to ask the panelists here, and I will start with you, Tracy, since you're in that commerce space. What are some of the things that mobile can learn from the early days of the web development?
One of the things that we're mobile first, and we're focused on building a mobile platform. And one of the things that makes us very different is that mobile offers a different level of engagement. So, with the early days of the web, people are online, people are exploring, people are discovering things that they couldn't discover before. What we're doing with mobile is we're taking that to a new level. And now you can discover at all times of the day. When you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed at night, we have a level of engagement that is propelling users to do things that they haven't done before. And so I think that mobile's offering, similar to what the web did in the early days, is offering a new platform for discovery.
And same question to you, Andrew.
Yeah, I think the biggest transformation between the first generation of the web and now what's happening with mobile is I use an analogy of the power grid. And before you used to have to plug into an outlet. And today you have a battery, which allows you to take power with you anywhere. And I think having information available no longer at a fixed outlet and being able to have that information with you anywhere you go just completely transforms how we interact with our physical and real world.
Right. And then just moving ahead just a little bit, if we look at Web 2.0 companies, a lot of Web 2.0 companies, they struggled to find their monetization strategies, yet they were highly successful in getting exorbitant valuations and whatnot. Now there are companies being built strictly for mobile. So starting with you, Anthony, what are some of the maybe mistakes that some Web 2.0 companies made that you think mobile companies can look at and correct?
I would say the biggest constraint that mobile puts on the developer, or if you're coming up with, you've got your own company, is that it's really, you can't waste any of the user's time, right? You're engaging them at a specific moment, they're doing something, you're interrupting them, and so there's not a lot of room for fluff. You can't have, you've got to really think very, very carefully about the user experience, exactly what needs to be here, nothing more than that. And I think that kind of, conservative line of thinking in terms of your product development and your user experience is something that wasn't always done with some of the Web 2.0 applications and stuff, and that's a useful takeaway.
And
yeah, I was going to say, with Web 2.0 specifically, I'll take more of a technical angle, but not too technical. Web 2.0 is inherently web-based, whereas mobile is not just web, it's web and native and other types of experiences. So I think one of the takeaways, and I saw this doing a lot of consulting work for web companies, is that for mobile, if you're building a web application for your service, then you're assuming that there's going to be a browser on the other end. And in the reality is that you should be building what's called a network application, where it can communicate with, say, a native iPhone app and iOS Safari browser. So I think with mobile, not being married to one particular platform just as the web certainly being an important endpoint, will enable mobile companies to actually get a broader reach and not be sort of bound to some of the constraints that Web 2.0 companies had.
right. And I think that we can all agree that the web has evolved over the last 20 years, obviously, and we do have Google, which followed Lycos and others, et cetera. And so, what are some of the successes that Web 2.0 companies had that maybe their predecessors didn't have, and how can mobile companies build on top of that success from Web 2.0? That's open all over.
I'll jump. So I think one of the, what Web 2.0 companies were really, really good at tapping into their users, right? They tapped into their users for content, for getting people to share invitations out to other people. And so mobile, I think, in terms of thinking about it more as a network of people, and at that moment, how do you get somebody to loop somebody else in, the word of mouth, the virality. I think there's a lot of, I've certainly looked at literally, the viral flows of sign up that they had on, Facebook and LinkedIn, and how do these different services do it really well when thinking about how do you architect a mobile user experience that similarly can drive that level of adoption, even though you're on a phone rather than sitting in front of a computer.
Yeah, Web 2.0 companies were really good at actually changing the concept of computing as a whole on the web, where it was more entertaining, it was more engaging. And mobile's doing a very similar thing, and there's two different types of computing that's actually coming from mobile, and that's action-oriented computing, such as I want to find a place that serves margaritas right now, right? So you look it up and you go there. And then there's things like casual computing, where you have a tablet and you're sitting on your couch watching TV, right? You're sitting back, relaxed, or you're in bed or something like that. I think if you start to embrace those types of computing and focus on the UX, you'll have a really strong mobile offering.
Well, to follow along with that, I actually think with the casual computing, one of the things that we've seen, and I think is continuing to be a trend in mobile, is this concept of snacking. So you have a couple minutes to kill, you're sitting in line, you pull out your phone and you want to snack. You want to see what the latest deals are, you want to see what the latest news is. And you're just snacking on your phone. So the engagement in the user experience is more episodic, and it's more broken up into smaller pieces. And I think how you design a service that interacts with users is very different versus doing things, I guess, in batch, to be kind of nerdy about it.
Well, that's interesting because that concept of snacking and commerce, obviously, just like the web is starting to land through mobile apps, devices, et cetera. I don't know about all you, but I book all my flights and hotels through my mobile device now. And I buy products through my mobile, et cetera. So Tracy, can you talk a little bit about how you're able to get that? People only have a few minutes, and like to your point, Anthony, about the fact that there's no fluff. How are you able to cut through all that and get someone closer to a buying decision than maybe if they were on the web?
So that's a really interesting question, because Poshmark we just launched back in December, so we're a pretty new company, And when we were first starting to talk about the idea, a lot of people would say to us, people aren't going to buy on their phones. Surely they won't make purchases. I mean, maybe like a game, they'll download a virtual good, but they're not going to actually transact, right? And what we're seeing with just 8 or 9 months of data is that people are buying in droves. And it's because they have their phone with them at all times. And we're able to notify them if something that we think they will like is available to them. And that impulse purchase is very powerful. So that's one of the things we're seeing. The other really interesting thing is commerce has been around for quite some time. And the Web 2.0 wave, a lot of social engagement, but I haven't really seen a commerce company really take that social engagement and really drive commerce. We really think with Poshmark that we have a very interesting example of social commerce because people are buying from other people. And we're finding that the engagement on our site, the likes, the comments, the shares, the interactions are actually driving people to purchase more than they would normally. And I would chalk that up purely to a device that's with them at all times.
Right. And so what is, and this is off the script a little bit, you mentioned the word notify. And so question to you all is, should you be thinking mobile, when you're thinking about mobile apps or websites, et cetera, should it be based around notifications, or should you not rely on that and be hoping that you're more of a destination?
I think it goes back to the type of computing that the individual is doing. So when people hear mobile, they think on the go, constantly moving, and it turns out that most people are actually using their phone in a static environment more than they are when they're actually on the go. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be targeting people actually on the go, but I think if you start to take in the type of computing that they're actually doing, you got a better chance of reaching them. So certainly things like push notifications are great. But what about if they're on a mobile website or they're on just a regular website? How do you actually engage with them in that regard? Or what about SMS or even email? Is this something that should be considered? So overall, notification strategy is a challenge for sure, but being able to reach them based on what you think or can infer what they're doing on their context is going to help you be successful in that area.
I think what's interesting about notifications too is that I'd like to actually think of the app having a conversation with the user in a sense. And so now it's no longer just this pull mode, but it's a push mode. And so if you think of the phone almost as an agent or your buddy, and it's surfacing relevant information to you at the right time, that becomes really powerful again because it's always with you. And I think notifications, we're just scratching the surface. I mean, essentially Apple and to some extent Android have created a new inbox. And so managing that inbox, leveraging that inbox for virality, for re-engagement, I think companies are still just figuring that out. And then you look at things like Passbook, where some of that stuff can be pushed to the phone and maintained in terms of state, becomes really an interesting almost new platform, or at least feature set to leverage for these types of apps.
Okay, so now taking what you said there and thinking about two companies that are kind of probably at the tip of the spear in terms of notifications because they have so many users and people that have downloaded their apps, Twitter and Facebook. So starting with you, Anthony, can you talk to us about those two companies and what they're doing through mobile devices, and more importantly, which one do you think seems to understand where mobile is going, and how can the other work harder to address some gaps that they have today?
It's a good question because I don't necessarily have a great answer. I think that Twitter's done a better job with it, but that's in large part, it's a very different service, right? It's like Facebook is a company that was built on the web, like they're figuring out how they're going mobile, right? And so they're at least experimenting. They're floundering in some ways, right? They had the whole like HTML5 kind of fiasco that they backed off of. They went native. You always hear about them trying to figure out their monetization. I think there's huge opportunity for them in terms of the social implications of like, I want to go to some place now and where are my friends, more so than on Twitter. But Twitter's kind of already nailing it just in terms of, I have a moment, I'm going to post something, I'm going to get out there, we're going to unify the experience, and I can quickly, I get different notifications, somebody wants to catch me. I mean, some of the, I think we actually met basically through Twitter, right?
Yeah.
And I've met other report, you send a message to somebody, you like something, they fire one back to you, then you're doing a DM, and then all of a sudden it's like a conversation and you're meeting up, right? And so that's worked really well, and I think that streamlined simplicity is something that Facebook can look at, because the app's done a lot better, but it's still got a lot of stuff in it, and figuring out what's the right core interaction you want to drive.
Gotcha. Anyone else?
I was going to say Facebook, for example, Twitter is inherently mobile, but Facebook is more of a portal, and portal apps tend to not work really well on smartphones. So what you're seeing is Facebook is starting to sort of break down or decouple into modules individual apps like the camera, messaging, et cetera. And that's more effective because when you pull out your phone and maybe you want to message someone on Facebook, you can just use the Messenger app. The interesting thing about Facebook is that now that they're a public company, they have analysts sort of breathing down their neck about how are you going to monetize on mobile, and the discussion seems to be squarely focused on advertising. And in my opinion, when everybody's looking in one direction, there's probably value someplace else. And I think Facebook has they're in a unique position for mobile, particularly when it comes to this space of mobile payments. Facebook has Facebook credits. They have 1 billion users worldwide. They're in seemingly every country. Why wouldn't Facebook potentially use Facebook credits as a universal currency or something along those lines? So in the longer term, I think if Facebook starts to embrace sort of a less portal-facing app and maybe even go into the mobile payment space, they've got a huge opportunity. When it comes to Twitter, just last week I was in Berlin with some friends of mine, and we didn't communicate through SMS or phone calls. We communicated directly through Twitter. So Twitter is in a unique position as well to compete with companies like WhatsApp, Voxer, et cetera, where they could actually be a messaging provider and even work with mobile network operators on the messaging front, because mobile network operators are losing loads of revenue on things like telephony and SMS. So where do they make up that money? Maybe it's a partnership with Twitter.
I think another thing to consider is that Twitter is great because of the real-time aspect of the feed, but there's so much content that Twitter pushes through to your feed, and because it's mobile and the size of the screen is so small, what you find is you miss a hell of a lot of stuff because the way the stream is constructed, it's first in, first out, right? It's just a linear stream of content. What I really like about Facebook, and we're integrating Poshmark very deeply into Facebook for this reason, is that it's not a first in, first out. It's more of a logical construction of your feed. They're trying to understand what is important to you, what is not important to you, and show you the relevant content on your newsfeed, which I think is very important for mobile because you just don't have the real estate to push everything to you.
And Joe, you just mentioned something about advertising. And that is one question. I've seen a lot of different companies build out their mobile strategies, and advertising does seem to play a role in it. And can you all talk a little bit about different types of revenue models that maybe companies either that are solely focused on mobile or are looking to build up their strategies in mobile should be thinking of that aren't advertising?
I mean, I think, following on the payments discussion, I think micropayments are really interesting on mobile. One is, Apple has, I can't remember, 300-400 million credit cards in their database, and that's just a massive amount of data in one click. You can actually consummate a purchase. And the ability to, again, have this idea of snacking and like, oh, I want to go grab this, or I want to go grab that. I don't think twice about paying 99 cents for an app. And yet, if you look at an ARPU of a mobile app, getting $1 for a year for a user is actually a pretty good ARPU to start from. So I think there's just a lot of interesting opportunities there in terms of direct monetization of the consumer, leveraging the mobile platform, whether it's Passbook or an app or something like that.
When it comes to advertising on mobile particularly, I've done a little bit of research in this area. It's challenging for sure, but one of the things that I think we've learned is trying to take what we've learned from the web and advertising it, and just advertising directly applying it to mobile is a bad idea, lackluster results at best, but there's plenty of companies doing it. Instead, I think if you step back and try to just refocus on how do we actually engage with people inside of an application or inside of a mobile website, you start to come up with concepts, things like in-app product placement, if you will, right? So think about television shows where you see a Cisco telephone on an episode of The Office. That wasn't just put there per chance, that was put there by design. So think if you could start thinking of advertising less of some display banner that may have nothing to do with you or the experience in the app, and more along the lines of in-app product placements, if you will.
I like trying to think about the real world interactions that you can drive through it. So like when we were talking earlier about, if you're looking at conversions on the web, you're looking at people splitting hairs on percentage, 1%, 2%, 3% for driving like an e-commerce purchase or something. But in the real world, in retail, it's like 60, 80%. If you're walking around a store because you're actually physically doing it, you're so much more likely to actually make a purchase to buy something. And so it's like, can mobile help facilitate these real world interactions that you want to drive. Like in my case, it's connecting business people, right? And since the other end of it, the receiving end, the business also is using something that's on our platform, we can measure that still, right? So even if we're driving a consumer to meet somebody else and then he's got a business lead out of it, that's come through us and we still know. And so we understand the value that we are playing in that, like, that chain, but.
I mean, I'm very biased. We're commerce all the way. When we were thinking of different types of ideas, we definitely wanted to integrate our business model with our revenue model. And commerce is amazing. Our top purchasers have purchased over $1,000 this year already, and it's all mobile.
Wow. Anthony, you just mentioned something, and I think it speaks on. We've been focused mostly on this idea of apps that are consumer focused, I think. And one of the questions I have is, do you see, as in thinking about the future of mobile, is there a bigger slice of this that's going to start coming out of SaaS companies or companies that are more B2B focused? I can't think of what a Salesforce.com does today through mobile devices, but I can imagine that that's something they care about. So what are some B2B companies out there that you think could stand to benefit from having a deeper mobile imprint and strategy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned Salesforce. It's like, in my mind, there's a lot of, being at a desktop, you're literally sitting at a desk, right, in your office or something like that, and then so much of what you do ends up going on in person, and it's all this unstructured lost data, right? It's not actually connected to anything. And so think about, like, Salesforce is trying to help you track your customer relationships. What's helping you initiate them, right? What's helping you actually do the discovery of this is a person you should meet, or that is a potentially good, client for you. Yeah. So trying to connect, like that, even LinkedIn, you start to think, I mean, that's, more consumer, but it's like they want people to actually meet each other, right? Like, how do you deal with the discovery side of it? And so any business company that can move into that space, I think it's a powerful spot. That's great.
And I think another angle, I can't name names because it's still confidential, but there's a large cosmetics retailer that is using an analytics platform, including retail on-premise analytics, to do real-time staffing. We need 3 people in we need 3 people in makeup, we need 2 people in hair care, like real-time staffing, fluid inventory management, all these types of things. And so being able to take some of the analytical discipline that we've had the benefit of data in the online world and applying that to the offline world, mobile becomes the mortar between those bricks, no pun intended. And I actually think that's really interesting.
The one thing I do want to point out about the concept of SaaS with mobile is that SaaS, say like a Salesforce or even what Bazaarvoice does, is inherently web and it's hosted, right? Whereas on mobile, you have compiled apps. So it's very different because an app that you download through the App Store is a piece of software that isn't necessarily going to be able to automatically get updated from a traditional SaaS model. Whereas if you use Salesforce, you log in, it's a website. If they make changes on their back end, you automatically get those sort of updates. That process is very different nowadays with the App Store model or even having an internal App Store for your particular company. So if, for example, you want to add a new feature to some particular app, you can't just update, say, your website or your web server, and that app is immediately going to have it. You're going to have to figure out a better way of actually getting the distribution of those new features for your apps that are actually out there.
Isn't that just a short-term problem, though?
It absolutely is. I mean, but the reality is that when you're dealing with a compiled version of a particular piece of software, and there is a gatekeeper on that other end, there are challenges that are going to have to be met, whether it's a partnership with Apple or Android or Google for that matter, or any of these other particular providers that are out there.
Okay, so before I open up for audience questions, a couple of questions. One, Instagram. So we saw the power of what one company could do that's mobile focused. They had, I don't know what the number was, 13 employees or something at the time of acquisition. So there's a lot of potential here. And Instagram speaks to the desire of people to maybe keep a photo diary or personally brand themselves, etc. What are some other hobbies or activities that people do on a daily basis, or maybe they would like to do? Everyone wants to be a photographer, but very few people are willing to take the time to build the skill. So what are some other areas that you see Instagram-like model being applied to? I had a friend who's a restaurateur, and we were talking about if there was ever a way to capture your smell through an iPhone or through Android and transmit that to someone, like a scratch and tip or something like that. Are there any industries like photography that you see being kind of taken over by this new mobile technology?
Great. Video is a big question. Like, is video going to be able to, video is really hard. It's harder than just taking a photo. So that's why I don't think anyone's cracked the nut on it. You heard about like Instagram for video with like a bunch of different services, and then I think they fell a little flat relative to the expectations. But there's still an outstanding question, I think, about video. Is that going to be something that an Instagram distribution kind of model can be, broadcast model rather, can be brought into?
Yeah.
The consumer app space is really sexy, particularly for startups. And what's not so sexy is the enterprise space. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for Instagram-like models for the enterprise space, as unsexy as they may sound. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
All right. Okay, so now what we'll do is we will open it up to audience questions. Again, everyone raised their hand when they said they downloaded an app and that they still have needs with their mobile devices. So ask away. And please, if someone has a microphone here, and so, okay.
My question kind of involves actually the tablet computing. How much do you think mobile and tablet computing are tied together? I mean, do you see more, because I see it in industries like healthcare or hotels, you'll see more and more tablets because mobile is so small and there's no real estate, and whereas a tablet is lightweight and most people do have a bag. So do you see those merging, and can they become one and the same, or do you see them staying separate?
So I go back to the analogy I used about plugging into a wall outlet or having a battery. And to me, the form factors are elastic, right? So the fact that I have a device that's with me on the go changes how I interact with my world and the information that's available. So I think of tablet as an extension of mobile, and I would actually include it in mobile in some ways. And with the supposed iPad mini coming, we're going to see additional form factors in there, and it's elastic, right? So really it's thinking about more going back to the behavior and the user experience, right? Am I sitting down and doing a bunch of things, or I'm creating a lot of data, or am I out interacting with things, and then what do I need this device, and how do I need this to interact with me?
I think the tablet's very, very interesting for also on the consumer side. Like we're iPhone only, and we're thinking that the next device for us could be an iPad, because when a user grabs a tablet or an iPad, they're ready to engage. And it shows in the revenue numbers with these types of devices is that when users are logged in through an iPad versus an iPhone, they tend to spend a lot more time with you and tend to spend a lot more money. So we're
bigger snacks.
Bigger snacks. They're having meals. They're having meals with their iPads.
I was just going to say, when it comes to tablets, particularly in the retail space, we're starting to see tablets be used as an additional tool to close the sale. You're seeing this in places like Sephora, Nordstrom's, Restoration Hardware, and we'll probably start to see it almost everywhere. The phone, on the other hand, I'm starting to see it be used more for actual sort of staffing. I think you were mentioning earlier about real-time staffing or the ability to communicate. So if you imagine Atlantis, for example, they have thousands of employees on this giant resort. Maybe the fastest way to communicate with them is something like a Voxer or a WhatsApp, right? So that's a good use case for a smartphone, whereas a tablet is maybe you're in Nordstrom's and you're trying to, you have difficulty determining on a pair of shoes or something. A store associate that's a good salesperson can probably already sell you the shoes, but they have an additional tool in their arsenal, which is the tablet, to help them do that. I see that happening a lot more and probably won't stop.
Okay, next question. Mobile devices? Hold your phone up if you have a question. Yeah. Sorry.
So, we hear all the time that mobile commerce is coming and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and more adopted by more and more people around the world. And I'm curious what you guys think are the key things that are standing in the way of it being, really widely adopted at the moment. If you think it's just a matter of changing people's habits, or if you think there's some key technological barriers that are standing in the way, and if so, what those might be.
I'm sorry. I'll take moderator's privilege and answer your question first. Okay, so I will say that I mentioned earlier that I book flights and hotels on my mobile device, and what I will say is that there was a lot of research showing for the travel industry, for example, that the average consumer looks at somewhere between 8 and 24 different websites before making their trip plans. So before they book their hotel, their flights, etc. And what I've found is whether it's a company like a JetBlue or a Starwood Hotels, et cetera, they are recreating that situation on mobile devices by building their own apps, and they're all standalone, right? So now you're just looking at 24 different mobile apps to make that decision. And so I think that one of the barriers is getting that mentality that you need to host everything. In some ways, you actually may generate more revenue and more leads if you find a way to connect yourselves. So American Express, for example, they have a mobile app, and so does JetBlue, and so does Starwood. Well, both those companies have American Express cards. So maybe something to look at is a partnership where your apps can move between one another, so no one has to back out of your app and then go into another. Because I think that what they're really missing is this idea that, hey, they only have a few minutes, and maybe they've already downloaded the app, so they've already made their consideration there, right? I downloaded the JetBlue app. I've already decided that I'm going to fly JetBlue, but the thing to get me quicker to making the deal is to find some way to prove that that's the cheapest flight or the most convenient flight or whatever on your app that may require me going and looking at a Delta flight or American Express, airlines, et cetera. So that's just one industry where I think that if they take that mentality of like, oh, whatever works on the web, we should do that on mobile, would work.
I'll take a little different spin on it from the sort of overall adoption piece. If you look at, and what I think is going to be a major driver of this is particularly the growth in emerging markets. So if you look at the BRIC nations like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and even MIST, Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, and Turkey,
so many acronyms, so places.
they're experiencing massive growth in middle classes, and that's ultimately a consumer class. But it's very different for someone, say, in Colombia or Brazil to afford a $800 iPhone, whereas they may be able to afford a much cheaper smartphone. So, for example, Mozilla and Telefonica are actually creating a Firefox OS phone that will be sold in Brazil for $50. So the cost of phones being adopted, I don't think is going to be the major problem. The bigger problem is actually the infrastructure. So particularly in places like India and in South America, the infrastructure itself isn't really set. The infrastructure in San Francisco isn't really set up to handle the amount of data that's actually pumping through the majority of these devices. So I think when you start to see the critical mass of adoption of smartphones themselves, we really have to have the infrastructure underneath it to support it to really continue to drive that growth.
All right. Go ahead.
I can also add that I think we have some ways to go designing good user experiences. I don't know how many of you guys have tried to buy something from your phone, and as soon as you hit a credit card wall, I bounce. I don't have time I don't have my credit card memorized. I can't put it in. So one of the things we think about quite a bit at Poshmark is how do we make buying so easy? How can we make, if someone wants to buy something, how can we reduce all the barriers and friction points? And that what we've done with that is we've actually built our own payment system instead of integrating with a provider like PayPal, just so we can eliminate one or two steps from the process. So, but we still have a lot of work to do. And so I think that's definitely a barrier right now to commerce.
I shop too much on my phone because I actually do have my credit card numbers memorized.
Well, so
it's really bad.
But once it's in there, then it's dangerous, right? So
yeah.
I think that this will be a challenge to discover new apps and new commerce experiences. Once you've already purchased something, you should be, that's a one-click buy,
yeah.
Right?
All right, last question here. Microphone. Thank you.
Hello. So for a long time, I was an Android user, and I just got an iPhone a couple months ago. And I've noticed that the iPhone ecosystem is just it's far richer than on the Android. There's just so many more apps. The experience is so much better. There's more and more Android users, and I believe there's more Android users than iPhone users. So I always there a better Android experience? Why aren't more people developing for the Android? If there are actually more people, and so I just wanted to get your opinions on that about why the Android is kind of the red-headed child, on the end, and the iPhone kind of gets all the fun.
It's a great question, especially because you just said that you may be looking at the iPad rather than Android as your next platform. So,
I'm good. Yeah. So, it's all about fragmentation. It's like the iPhone, iOS. I've got like 5 devices. I can have in my office. We can test on them. It's pretty easy. The tools that they provide, Apple provides, are they're good, whatever. But the key thing is that there's something like 4,000 different Android devices for me to possibly test on. And you can look at, okay, you've got some market share. If you take the top 20 devices on the market right now, though, you've still only got something like, I don't know, like 40% overall of all the penetration of, of Android users. So it's like this long tail. Actually, I mean, it's so bad that like they're basically collecting phones in boxes, all the mobile developers around here. And we've got a little initiative called Mobile Dev Shop, where we're trying to basically just create like the Library of Congress for mobile devices. So there's one spot where everyone can go to test just for the community, right? Because of this issue, it's inhibiting us all from going as hard after Android as we'd like to, because it's just a real nuisance. And we get these irate emails from people that are like, does it work on my this, that, or the other phone? And I'm like, where am I going to buy that? Like Craigslist, like how am I going to find that phone? So yeah, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
From the developer's perspective, it's absolutely true when it comes to Android. But from the consumer perspective, I think you're talking about two different ecosystems. So Apple has a really strong, tightly integrated ecosystem, from Apple TV to your MacBook to the iPad, the iPhone, et cetera, right? And then they have now a lot of SaaS-based services like iCloud and whatnot baking into that. Google has a very different set of services in their ecosystem, and more of them are software-based. Right. So they've actually had more focus on the engineering aspect of providing things like Google+, Gmail, Google Drive, et cetera, and now they're starting to get more into the hardware space, where it's debatable on the success of what they've had there, but ultimately, I think what it comes down to is a lot of, do you want more of a tightly integrated experience for hardware and software when it comes to something like Apple, or do you want something that's more tightly integrated when it comes to a plethora of services that you use sort of on a day-to-day basis, like Gmail and Google Docs, that sort of thing?
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for your great questions, and let's give these panelists a hand.